We just need to stay with the trouble and keep listening to each other and loving each other, basically, through it. And questioning and keeping an open heart and keeping curious as to what we all need to be able to live alongside each other with plural views and without trying to adjust or change, but just being able to accept this kind of plural way of being together and accept our different needs.
Welcome, dear souls. Last night we held our members' soul space on the emergent theme of transitions and our relationship with expansion and contraction, which in Sanskrit we call spanda. It's really understanding how, as we grow, as we expand, as our wingspan increases, we have to contract back in order to keep expanding out. And we explore deeper this process along with a beautiful meditation and energy healing with some seeds so that we can be in the space of a collective shift. And the video is available now for all members. Our next soul space is going to be on Sunday, the 10th of September at a different time to make it accessible to different time zones. The details are in our newsletter of the next one. And if you're not a member yet, please do join. It is the heart of this podcast. It is how you show your support and become part of this deeper collective journey of transformation. You can join by visiting allthatweare.org/support. And you will find that there is a sliding scale for both annual and monthly memberships. For anyone that is coming to Medicine Festival next weekend, I will be sharing a panel on the Advaya stage on the Sunday evening, and the theme is Unapologetic You, Stepping into Spiritual Leadership. And I'm also doing a book signing for Intuition at the Resurgence stall. You will be able to find out the exact times of these happenings on the events page of my website, and I would love to see you there. My guest today is Zoe Laureen Palmer, a multidisciplinary artist, co-creator, and human ecologist working at the intersection of the arts, health, and ecology. Her regenerative practice explores our relationship with the more than human world, centering embodied ecologies, underrepresented narratives, and knowledges through a decolonial lens. In 2021, as part of Season for Change, she co-created the Dreaming Field Lab, a crucible, carnival, sanctuary, imaginarium, and radical rest retreat celebrating women of colour in the British landscape. Recent collaborations include work on Black Earth resistance, wild cards for Glimpse Collective, seeding the commons for the Gaia Foundation, and custom food lab and panel curation for the Blue Earth Summit. Her award-winning work spans live performance, installation, text, and participatory events, and has been programmed across the UK and internationally at venues, including the Royal Opera House, Carnegie Hall, and the National Theatre of Mannheim. Zoe is currently exploring collective dreaming methodologies, radical kinship, care, unknowing, and creating ordinary rituals and portals for dangerous times, asking, how can we create possibilities for intimacy without proximity to the natural world? How can we entangle ourselves in each other's lives through everyday acts of collective care? How can we collectively disrupt capitalist narratives of human dominance and de-center ourselves, allowing the world to breathe and dream through us? She is a gentle beekeeper for the past 15 years and a fourth-year student at the Plant Medicine School. She's currently cultivating an afro-futurist apothecary, a part real, part speculative British African herb garden in response to climate breakdown. Zoe was a speaker in the Rise Up series that I hosted for Change Festival that was curated by Becky Birchall, who you can hear in episode 150, And through that episode page, find the videos of the talks. In this episode called Pollinating Our Imagination, we explore the themes of beekeeping, collective care, and cultural intuition as we speak to the question, how do we create moments of collective care and sanctuary in troubled times? We explore beekeeping as practice of collective and community care, a teacher of reciprocity, interbeingness, and storytelling, collective disassociation and creating sanctuary, reclaiming shattered lives and places, our relationship with slowing down and decolonizing time as an act of collective care, interspecies grief and finding ways of flourishing in a world that's diminishing, how we can rekindle our intimacy with each other and the natural world, and how to open this conversation up to the wider living world. We hope that this episode invites you into a deeper relationship with all of life. Welcome to All That We Are with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies, to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible.
Welcome, Zoe. It is a delight to have you here sharing on All That We Are. Thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
What are the futures of your wildest dreams?
I love this question. I'm going to read you a piece I've written in response to this question. It's called Infinite Ecologies. In the soft place of wordlessness, in our black and brown bodies, our infinite ecologies, we rest. Muscles coiled around the root of intersection, the darkness on heart's tongue glimmering in the glory of perception, cracked wide open at the subtle throat of dusk. Lichen breathing dogwood, breathing elder, breathing us. Steer us by our antlers on the palms of our feet, across the grief of this violent hiatus, through the heat, grind and glare of this mirror-deep crisis, into the soft place of wordlessness, where in our black and brown bodies, our infinite ecologies, we rest. We shed skin against carcass of ash and other dying kin. We spit joy on our woundedness. We sing as a poultice. We dance with the furies of the state we're in. We don't shrink. We don't stop to mop up the mess. We've got salt on our forearms, high priestess, alchemist. And in the soft place of wordlessness, in our black and brown bodies, our infinite ecologies, we rest. We let laughter be our guard against po-face and earnestness, as visions of reciprocity course through our veins, and time is a squeeze box collapsing in on this one breath, then expanding electric into the light limitless, as our children's children's children rest in the arms of our canopy, casting their dreams in gold and radical synergy, blossoming, rising, dying, effortless.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sitting with the question and inviting in your inspiration.
I'm thinking about a wish for liberation, not just for humans, but for all beings, for more than humans, and about a wish for finding our way back into entanglement with the more than human world, and how that might look and feel, and yeah.
When you and I met at Change Festival a couple of years ago, curated by the wonderful Becky Birchall, you shared a story about your bees, and it was just completely captivating. And I would love for you to tell us about your relationship with bees and how that came to be and what it is that you've learned from the bees.
You can't, it's really hard to avoid bee puns when you talk about bees. I'm going to try my best. I'm glad you've done one already. Yeah, my relationship with bees. So I met bees for the first time in my mid to late 20s. Well, I'd met bees many times before, but I had an experience when I was actually filming for National Geographic. One day we went to do a shoot with some beekeepers in Albania. They decided they were going to open the hive up, and they invited me to come and look at the hive. And they invited me to pull frames out of the hive. And they were in this mountains in Albania. I was just immediately drawn to the bees, but also to the beekeepers and how calm they were. And I was living in the middle of Hackney at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, I've got things to learn here. I've got learning to do. And it just sparked, I guess, kind of infinite curiosity about bees and their lives. And off the back of that, I came back to Hackney and I set up a kind of social enterprise working with young people facing structural inequality around access to nature. And bees became our kind of tool, or not a tool, our medium. So we had bees on the housing estate where I lived in Hackney, or just around the corner from a different housing estate, but very near to where I lived. And we started working with them. And we started working with bees. We started working with young people who'd been kicked out of school because they were deemed unworkable with. And we just did it. It was like we were just exploring what happened when we made that connection in a really hyper-urban environment. Over time, I learned and saw and learned within myself as well that the wildness, also the ritual and the poetry of beekeeping, particularly in this hyper-urban environment, really enabled us to access other ways of knowing and kind of portals where we were working with the bees in this housing estate, but it felt like in those moments time really stopped and we really accessed a kind of expanded sense of time and also an expanded sense of space and time within ourselves. And some of the young people, they weren't using those words, but they were attesting to that in how they developed their relationships and how they spoke about the bees. So yeah, it was quite profound. I mean, we made lots of mistakes and we were working in a way that ecologically then over the years I realized was really out of whack and out of balance with the environment. So we kept on having to adjust our model, and hives were collapsing a lot and we were feeding them lots, and it was, it wasn't ecologically sound, but they kept alive and they kept teaching us to come back to a place of reciprocity. And for me, that's ultimately what I've learned over the last 15 years, was that actually the bees and the beekeeping has become a practice for me in care and in collective care and in multi-species like care and storytelling and learning, that's based on reciprocity and actually not on extraction. We realized that we could just learn from the bees just by being with them and by listening to them, and that there was so much to learn by being with them. Just anecdotal observations, like when you come towards the hive and you're experiencing high levels of anxiety or you're angry about something or frustrated, the bees are so sensitive. The hive is like a music box. It's like a vibrational box. It responds to that energetic starting point that you're bringing to the meeting. And the bees will raise their vibration. They'll match that. And so you would have angry bees. And so we started to observe that, and we learned pretty quickly that if we wanted to go and meet the bees, we had to bring ourselves into a place of expansiveness and calm. Otherwise, with some hives, certainly more than others, we would be working with very, very angry and aggressive bees, which is not fun. So yeah, there was just so much learning there, and still continues to be so much learning. I've still got hives now, 15 years on. They're now in Garden in Kent and some in Somerset, and actually my practice has evolved so that we don't really do much with them at all, and I miss them. I miss working with them so much, but I work with them much more intuitively now and much more gently, and I let them do their thing.
There's a story that you told me about a dream that you had. Can you share that and how that kind of taught you how to be with the bees?
So about 4 or 5 years after we started working with the bees in Hackney, we had an increasing number of hives, and I found that in the summers I was getting concerned about swarming, because we were in, as I said before, we were in a really built up urban area. And although at that time we were practicing kind of management of the hives, and we were trying to avoid swarming by moving them around, they swarm. That's what they do. That's how they reproduce. And you kind of want them to swarm. So I started developing a practice of kind of meditating, really, I guess, with the bees, and also a shamanic practice of journeying with them, really to ask them what they needed. And different answers would come back at different times, sometimes space, sometimes to move from the particular location they were in. But then one day, in the height of summer, I was just asleep one night and I had a dream. And in that dream, the bees very clearly said to me, "We're ready to swarm. We're ready to swarm." And so the next day I went down to the colony, where most of the colonies were in the garden, St Mary's Secret Garden in Hackney. And I just sat by the hives. And I told my colleagues, "What are you doing, Zoe?" And I was like, "I think the bees are going to swarm today." And they were like, "No, the weather's not right." And I was like, "I think they're going to swarm." And then anyway, so midday, like that's when they generally go. It's like around lunchtime in the afternoon when the sun gets to its highest. Anyway, they did swarm. It was amazing because they swarmed, and I was able to move with the swarm as it moved through this very dense housing estate. I was able to ask people to move. I was ahead of them, and I could ask people to move out of the way to go inside and to let people know, but also to show people that they didn't need to be afraid of it, and that if they just moved away gently and slowly, this wasn't something to be afraid of, and the bees would just do their thing, and there wasn't any fear. And I was walking alongside them as they swarmed, and I wasn't afraid. Yeah, it was amazing. And they just went to a nearby tree, and later that night I put the tree in the only thing I had to hand, which was a sports bag and the tree branch. So I got the swarm and I moved them into a new box, into a new hive. And again, that's not something I would do now, but that's how we were working with them then. So we took the swarm and we put it into a new hive.
When you said that you realised that you had to approach the bees from this place of calmness and groundedness and not with anger or fear, how did you work with that, especially with the young people that you were working with that, had been deemed people that couldn't be in school? And what practices did you use in order for you to come into that harmony before you entered into being with the bees?
And what was wonderful was that we didn't need to tell the young people anything. I didn't need to teach the young people that. The bees do the teaching. So the young people realised pretty quickly that if they didn't check themselves and get themselves back down on the ground from wherever they'd come, whatever they'd brought in, and some of them were bringing in really difficult things. Some of them were just bringing in bluster and bluff. So if they didn't get out of that space and come down onto the ground and have the humility to meet these creatures, like they knew they were going to get stung. And that wasn't something I needed to tell them, or any of us, because we would get stung too. I was getting stung. We were all getting stung if we came in with the wrong attitude. So it was like this incredible thing where we didn't have to say it. We didn't really have to teach anything. We let the bees show us how to be, they did show us in that way. And, you do learn pretty quickly. And actually, you can even learn to enjoy these things, which is what happened to me and how I feel now, because it's a medicine. So I'm not sure any of the young people got to that spot, but to that place. But I certainly have done, and I feel grateful for that because it's amazing medicine.
What do you feel like you receive from the stings?
It's energetic. It's vibrational medicine. It's energetic. But there's also all kinds of things in the sting, which I don't know the chemical constituents of, but there's all kinds of things in the sting which I feel support immunity. So I felt that over the years, it's built up my immune system, basically, having been stung so many times. I know they're used in Chinese medicine. There's a type of branch of apotherapy, which is used specifically for conditions like arthritis and rheumatism. So yeah, it just builds up your immune system. And energetically, for me, it was around protecting my own boundaries. I really felt that that's what the stings helped me to do, to kind of build up more of a boundary around myself in a kind of healthy way.
Powerful.
Yeah, it is. It's really powerful.
What is the difference of working with bees in a more exploitative, extractive way and being with them in a more reciprocal way? I mean, I know it's kind of obvious, but it's also interesting to hear.
For so long, we've thought of bees in terms of, what they can give us and what we can take from them, obviously extract from them. I guess with so many aspects of the modern human world, capitalism has led us into a relationship of consumption and commodification, and bees, unfortunately, have been part of that. And it's what we can get from them, what we can take from them, what they can do for us, not what can we do for them. But then if it has become what can we do for them, the narratives that we've gone down have been real saviour narratives, like, oh, let's save the bees. Hang on, how about we let the bees save us? And then we learn from them and we work that way around, rather than this kind of saviour narrative and that we have all the answers. How about we come from a place of maybe we don't have all the answers? So we allow the bees to work on us, emotionally, spiritually, physiologically, to dream through us and learn from them and approach the relationship that way. So I suppose that's really what my learning has been, because, we had a honey stall at Borough Market, we were selling honey, we were trying to maximize the yield from our hives, we were putting up lots and lots of hives on the tops of rooftops in London, and it wasn't ecologically sustainable. And we fell into that trap. We really fell into that trap. And suddenly we stood back and we were like, whoa, we're doing the very thing that we, all of our lives are practiced from the starting point of capitalism. We practice capitalism every day. That's the framework, unfortunately, for the context of the world we live in now. And to actually de-link ourselves from that structural problem, takes a lot of time and effort and thought. And I think that goes for our relationships across the natural world. Bees, plants, herbs, lots and lots of parts of the natural world have become commodified and have suffered the same oppressions that people have suffered, in the sense that they've been moved around and torn away from their original environments. And that kind of capitalist colonial mindset has really taken them away from the landscapes and the communities in which they originally came from. And that's the same with bees. So I learned pretty quickly that moving bees around, for example, treating them like something I could just pick up and then place in a different ecological context, didn't make sense any longer. Feeding them white sugar when they would usually be feeding on the resin and the nectar and the pollen from numerous, diverse, rich, flourishing sources, and to feed them stripped back white sugar on a rooftop in London, suddenly that just seemed like madness, like a form of madness, and like we were contributing to the problem. So yeah, it's been a big old learning curve and big old journey, and realizing that if we want to care for something, we really need to come into relationship on their terms and from their starting point, and to really meet them and give time for the relationship to develop and to see what they actually need, and in their ecological niche, what they need and what their function is, rather than just making them function for us and for what we need them to do in that moment.
It's really challenging, that invitation to slow everything down, to do everything with more care and more deep listening and less results, because that's the opposite of how we're wired right now as a dominant species, society.
Exactly. Like you say, it's really difficult, and we certainly don't have the answers, and certainly learning every day, but just decentering humans, like moving away from this idea of us as exceptional and humans, at the top of the hierarchy, and just thinking of ourselves as entangled, and remembering that entanglement and how that then affects the everyday relationships and interactions with those different things. And whether that's when we pick a flower in the garden, or take a herb to work with, or working with the bees, or whatever we're doing, consuming cacao, whatever we're doing, like giving gratitude and being aware of the wider context and oppressions that plant or that thing has also been through.
When we understand these as dangerous times, they're your words. Is it this that we're talking about now? that encapsulates that for you, or is there more?
I think it is this. I think it is this. I think it's this and more. It's complex, but it is this separation and this disengagement and this disentanglement. And it's asking, how can we return to being a part of again, as opposed to being separate from? Within that, it's the loss of our intuitive knowledge, of our suspicion of other knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge systems, and our dominance of rational mindset and mindset thinking, you know. So it's about, well, how can we enable a more plural world, a world in which pluralism is normal? We don't have phrases like woo-woo as a useful way of negating actually what is a very powerful aspect of ourselves. I feel like that's a capitalist tool of just negating the power, the inherent power and wisdom that we have, you know.
Absolutely. If you just take the piss out of it, and take the piss out of the feminine, and take the piss out of the sacred magic and power that every single human being is and has access to, then it all gets devalued and we carry on doing what we're told, buying the stuff.
Exactly.
All of it.
Exactly. So it's just a way of keeping us hooked in and dissociated in a way. It's like we've got this collective dissociation and we're dissociated from our bodies and we're hooked into this, you know, to the drug of capitalism. And until we really have a chance to step out of that and establish a new set of or a different set of practices, so we're not practicing capitalism anymore, until we really have time to do that, then yeah, I think it's quite challenging. I think it is potentially quite dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've been living through dangerous times, and now we have so much understanding of what the damage actually is. Maybe that always was. We'll never know. But from where we're sitting right now, we can see it all. And so it puts us in this position of, what do we do with all of this knowledge and understanding? And as you're talking about how plants have been taken out of their contexts and humans have also moved out of their context, it then becomes incredibly difficult to untangle, detangle what then belongs where, as we're sat here as British brown women. And so that part of my recent history of coming to England can't be erased. Like that's now, I was born here, that's now part of me. Some of the plants have been wherever they've been for so long. Like tea is not even English, and yet it's the most quintessentially English thing that you can do, is have a cup of tea. And so we live amongst such deep entanglements around belonging and place and context and origins. And so the decolonial work of this time is incredibly hard.
Yes, I feel that. Like you say, it's so complex and layered, and it's not just a question of negating, but somehow managing to embrace the shifting identities that people have, but at the same time also of enabling and celebrating and creating space for, you know, like for people, Black and brown people of colour, in these new contexts and in these other environments. That's certainly been, in terms of my work with decolonising or creating space for people of colour in the British rural landscape, that's certainly what I've been trying to explore. It's like, what does that look like? What does safety feel like here? Can we ever feel safe here? And just starting to consider all of those layers and complexities of how we can create sanctuary on really troubled ground. How do we do that? What does that look like? And do we actually need to come to the countryside to do that? Can we create that in urban spaces? And not dichotomy, because that's too clean, but the weave between the urban and the rural, and our proximity to an intimacy with nature and the natural world.
Yeah, and this notion of us as humans and respect for whatever context and whatever complex histories and her stories we all have, and the plant stories, and deep respect in being able to connect like you did with the bees and listen what's needed now. Like, is there a different approach, or is there a different way of connecting or relating? what is relationship between humans, but with the earth?
Yeah, I think that question, what is relationship with the earth? How do we become involved with each other's lives? How do we re-entangle? How do we become involved? And particularly, how do we become involved if we don't have our feet on like wild earth, like if we're living in urban areas, which most people are, an increasing number of people will be doing? What does it look like to cultivate relationship in those spaces? How do we move towards intimacy without proximity? What does that feel like? Those are all things that I've just really been pondering. Questions around things like interspecies grief, like we're not the only ones grieving right now in these times, and just being aware that we're not the only ones that are losing, for whom our species is suffering. And how do we collectively honour that kind of sense of the interspecies grief without trying to personify another species or without putting words in their mouth? How do we honour that loss that other species are going through too as well? So I think that's quite a potent question for me at the moment.
And then that sparks a question for me of like, how can we listen and learn from other species how to live these times? And what wisdom are they holding that could show us a much more elegant way of being in this world right now?
Yeah, right. And how can we do that? And who can do that? There's often issues here in this conversation around like access, like who has access to that knowledge, who has access to that time, who has the privilege to spend time listening to nature. I think that's a really important question, because for a lot of us, there isn't that time to do that. People are attending to basic needs. We're in the middle of various intersecting crises, health crises and economic crises. And I think to actually have the privilege of time to step out of that and to connect, and to be part of this conversation is challenging on lots of levels. So for me, that's always a context for this work and for these questions. It's like, who is actually getting to think this stuff through? Who actually has the privilege to take the time to cultivate these relationships? And how can we open this conversation up so we have a more plural set of voices coming to the table, of human voices coming to the table?
How can we?
Oh my gosh, I don't know if I have any answers. I just have loads more questions. How can we bring different humans to the table and their voices? And what is the appeal to be part of this conversation? If people have never had a connection with nature before, or for some people, if nature is frightening or a fearful place, and historically, thinking back to some of our ancestral relationships, lots of people are carrying ancestral trauma. It's particularly around access to nature and wild spaces, around forests that were dangerous spaces, spaces where people might have been executed or shot, around swamps where slaves were using in America to flee from their colonial masters. So there's a lot of historic and intergenerational trauma around various landscapes. There's also some work to do in acknowledging that. This is a difficult and complex question, often involves going into some deeply personal and difficult stuff. Just to bring people to the table here and say, how do we relate to this landscape here? Well, it by definition involves going back and thinking about ancestrally our connections with land. And when we do that, it brings up all kinds of stuff for people, particularly in Black and brown communities, because there has been so much intergenerational trauma around land. In the UK too, with the crofting and the clearances, and there are traumas around for everyone around land access, and I suppose it's just holding that in awareness and being mindful that it's difficult work, obviously tied up in this country with land justice and racial justice, and again, all of those intersecting issues.
Yeah, it really makes me actually think of the waters and just where we are in the world right now, where for many people, waters and boats are a symbol of luxury, and they're a symbol of like excellent days of being waited on and champagne on boats. And for a heartbreakingly increasing number of humans, boats and swimming the seas are a symbol of crisis and death and desperation. it's the same sea.
Yeah, it's so I find thinking about the Mediterranean, I find it so problematic. And I'm sure many, many people do. It's the same sea. Who is afforded rest and leisure while across the ocean people are drowning and trying to just create a safe home and a safe space to live? Historically, obviously we can link that back to the slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade and all the people, thousands of millions of people who were moved across the oceans. And so the kind of memory of water as holding that, as a place of holding that trauma too, I think is very powerful. And the fear, like you say, the fear that often surrounds water for so many reasons. But it's very problematic for me, that sense of the Mediterranean has become a space where on the one hand, we have the leisure and the rest of the kind of cultural elite, or not even the cultural elite, just people who can afford to take holidays and play and have leisure in these spaces, whilst a few hundred miles away we're dealing with huge camps of refugees and migrants, and it's really troubling.
Well, sometimes on the same island.
Yeah, well, sometimes on the same island.
On one side of the island, you might have a spiritual community. On another part of the island, you will have luxury villas, and on another part of an island, refugee camps on a tiny island. And I mean, it's extraordinary, the ability for compartmentalism that we have in these times. And one of the things that I have seen as well in my life is that a lot of people in Black and brown bodies aren't very good swimmers, because it's not kind of culturally leisure swimming. It isn't part of the lifestyle. And then I'm just imagining people that have never even really swam having to swim in ocean, because it's that level of fear and desperation. And here in the UK we've just passed this horrific migrants bill, and it's just I don't even have any words to try and even make sense of what this is that we're living in, that's happening right now. And so as you talk about what's happened in the past and the ancestral trauma, and then it's wow, and there's so much that's happening now. And of course there's so many of us being we just need to connect to nature more, and nature has the answers. And then it's well, but what if your connection to nature is having to swim across the sea for your life?
Right, exactly. And I think you've really pinpointed this ability that we've developed to dissociate, to really, really dissociate. Well, two things: dissociate and dehumanize. Again, it's coming back to that. So we talk about them as migrants, we talk about them as a block, they become dehumanized. And hang on a minute, these individual people with individual lives and families and whole communities, and that just ability to silo people off from ourselves so that we can then, like you say, compartmentalize, and it can be someone else's problem. And actually, I find that really terrifying. And likewise, speaking to the remembrance that these wild spaces are not easy spaces for so many people to navigate, and water being a space of fear, being reminded of that on a daily basis. So what is the conversation we need to have here around that? How can people begin to feel safe again? What does safety look like? What does safety in nature look like?
And it brings about questions of belonging, and that's such a theme of our time, and that many living in dominant culture that have homes, that have jobs, that have access to leisure are on a quest of belonging. That real sense of belonging is somehow missing in this culture. And then that invites us into this, we all belong to this earth, and yet we have so many people that through circumstances way beyond their control are having to leave those lands and be in this place of having no home, of searching for actual belonging, of a place of rest. And that so much of this is to do with either man-made conflicts or the places that are getting too hot, the places that are getting too wet. And so we are in this crisis of belonging. And so much of it is also around the severance of our wisdom and being interspecies in our relationality.
The climate crisis is a crisis of belonging, a crisis of imagination, a crisis of time. For me, I'm interested in exploring and questioning how we can re-establish that sense of belonging in community and that sense of kin and kindred and kindness, and how we can just with small steps, with small acts, everyday acts, whether that be literally watering your house plants on your windowsill or your neighbour's house plants on their windowsill every day, and through those really gentle, daily, mundane acts of care and kindness, how we can start to weave some sense of belonging back into the fabric of our beings, particularly in working in, as I do a lot, in urban areas where we've got lots of different people living alongside each other. It's like, how can we really start to weave and knit together over a shared sense of ownership over a particular, like, not piece of land, but over a particular place, over a particular community. And that's a theme of some of what I'm exploring in my work at the moment in the sort of hyper-locality of East London, which is really exciting to be doing. And what do people need, and what conversation do they want to have around this, around like how we can begin to do this together as a collective.
And what are you understanding about what collective care is in these times?
I think it's what we were just speaking to. It's about the reassembling of community. Our communities have been shattered and fragmented, and so many of people's lives have been shattered and fragmented by capitalism. And it's like, how can we now reassemble our lives and our places together with the more than human world, not just as humans together, but in collaboration with the plants, the flora, the fauna, the more than human world in that particular place? How can we find ways of flourishing in a world that's diminishing, that's dying, basically? How can we still flourish? And I don't mean that in a kind of trite way of saying let's all be happy and joyful, but let's actually deeply flourish and hold all of the complexities and all of the grief alongside that, but still be able to flourish and grow. Part of that work for me is also around the restorying of what community looks like. What are the narratives that we're telling? And how can we come into ways that are just more livable, like on a purely day-to-day, like practical basis, that are just more, that are slower and more livable and more nourishing for all of us. Those are some of the ways that I've been thinking about collective care.
It sounds good. How can we make this experience that we're in more livable? How do we make good lemonade from these lemons?
Yeah, this is the question that we're all trying to figure out, isn't it? This is the answer that I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer, but all I know is that we need to keep listening to each other. There's that lovely phrase of staying with the trouble, Donna Haraway, that we just need to stay with the trouble and keep listening to each other and loving each other, basically, through it, and questioning and keeping an open heart and keeping curious as to what we all need to be able to live alongside each other with plural views and without trying to adjust or change, but just being able to accept this kind of plural way of being together and accept our different needs. Perhaps that's working like across silos with artists and scientists and business people and getting all people around the table and really thinking out of our silos and really allowing ourselves to work collaboratively. And I mean, truly, deeply collaboratively, like without judgment, and saying, okay, we're going to bring a cultural intuitive into this space now. What can they bring to this conversation? What can the scientists bring to this conversation without the hierarchy of thinking, of falling back on, oh, well, the scientists must be right. Well, hang on a minute. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe we need some other ways and modes of knowing now to come to the fore. But that would be my instinct for now, that we need to just rebalance the modes of and the ways of knowing that are at the table, because we've been dominated for so long by this very rational mindset. And by that, I also mean lived experience, and bringing people with lived experience right up to the table, saying we're all going to gather together, and obviously having the more than human there too at the table, finding a way to give voice to that without anthropomorphizing and inflicting just human values onto to the more than human. And I think that just comes through time and through cultivating relationship, through care. So it's those gentle, slow acts of care, daily watering the plant, daily looking at the plant, daily feeding your cats, or doing whatever you're doing on a daily basis to care for the thing. And that over time will build up into relationship, and over time can build up into a more intuitive sense of knowing how something is doing.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
One of the things that I've learned about caring is that when we do it really from that place of love and that place of really wanting to, like you said earlier, like listening to those that we're caring for, not just tasks that need to be done. Yeah. Like, okay, I'm going to do that. And I have to do that. I have to do that. Yeah. But actually wanting to really be with and support others, be it more than human, be it older generations, be it kids, be it everyone that's struggling with mental health issues at this time. I mean, the list goes on, but understanding that support is always reciprocal, and that when you're helping someone, they're always helping you, and that you receive something from it that's always really, really profound. And actually it gives you more energy to be alive. It gives you more energy for these times. And it's hard because I feel like that can go really out of balance because of all of the systems of oppression and the economic factors of capitalism that I know so many people that are even middle class that are just struggling with taking care of people in their family, of their kids or whatever it is. And it feels like there's an invitation to tap deeper into our resilience and into that space of connection and bringing more connection into those moments so that it has that feedback loop that brings more energy.
Yeah, that's it. I think that thing you've touched, you've really hit upon the reciprocity of it all, and also how we nourish ourselves through these times. And I know, and the reciprocity of that relationship. And so for me, that was working with the bees, and is also working with the herbs and the plants. And that's the nourishment that I get that enables me to then do this work and to avoid burning out and to all those things. I think you're right. I think it's the recognition of exchange, that we're all in relationships of exchange, and that they might take different weights and different balances at different times, but that ultimately it's about reciprocity. I think that is the invitation. We don't need to necessarily extract in the same way that we have been doing, but allowing nature to support us and the natural world to support us, and to us to feel that there is this support that's always there, that's always deeply there, which is the earth, obviously. But just to be able to feel that, and it's the simplicity of that, but it's always there for us to access wherever we are, being able to root down into that and to nourish ourselves if we can just take the time, if we can afford to take the time to make that, to reestablish that connection. And I know that's hard. That's very hard in our busy lives.
And there's something about changing the story where it's like, yes, these times are busy, they're full on, they're dangerous, they're challenging, and I'm going to find moments of connection in my day. I'm going to give myself space to look into the eyes of the people that I'm around. I'm going to give myself space to feel my feet on the ground, to savor those moments, because those little moments are the bits that get you through and open up into that, like that sense of thriving within. difficult situations. I mean, one thing that I've learned is that things aren't going to get easier. It feels like as we are in this climate crisis, in ways that are related, perhaps sometimes more obviously, but often that are related in more kind of subtle ways of entanglement that you wouldn't even necessarily realize. Most people that I have connected with have noticed that their lives have become more difficult, that the challenges within their day-to-day are bigger. And so there's something there that there is no, okay, just get through this hurdle and then it's going to be that this is actually it. And so we only have this in which to also thrive and enjoy our lives.
Yes, that's so true, that we have to find ways of flourishing and thriving within, like you say, within this context. And I feel like this is really the work of decolonizing time, you know, because this is the work of saying, okay, so time is speeding up in the climate crisis, right? Time is exponentially, we're being given clocks every day, you know, this much time to do this much time to do this much time to do this. And it's on a linear colonial mindset and framework of time. And actually, I feel like our challenge is around how can we decolonize time, push back against that, and create these, like you say, these openings or these portals of where space and time are actually, where we can actually access our deeper mind and, as you say, receive nourishment, give nourishment. And for me, that's really the work of this moment. It's that tension of us speeding towards this thing that we're being told. And whilst at the same time, more than ever, we need to cultivate within ourselves and within our communities the capacity to really take time and to really slow down and to really give our minds a break from this high-speed drama that we're kind of on, sort of psychodrama.
It's exasperated by our phones.
Which is exasperated by our phones and all the tools of capitalism that they hook us in with, all the tools that they hook us in with, that we're all hooked in with, that we all use, you know? So it's like, yeah, how do we keep hold of these spaces where we can slow and expand and be in community and be in deep connection with each other and with the more than human world? I feel like that's the real tension and the real challenge, and can also be a place of great joy when we realize that we can cultivate that in spite of everything that's going on.
I love that, the relationship between time, because I know that everyone can relate to like those moments where time kind of slows down and you don't know whether you've been doing what you're doing. Normally you're connecting with another human being or another species, a tree or something, and you don't know if you were there for 5 minutes or 5 hours. And most of us know that when we're just sort of doing our like wake up, do the thing, it's like, oh, where did the day go? Like, how many times have you said, where did the day go? Yeah. And so actually tuning into that capacity that we do have as human beings to slow down time, to create moments of deep time.
Yes, it's about trusting that we actually do have time. We actually do have time and we can take time. And that goes back to delinking ourselves from the pressures of capitalism and saying we can actually take time in this moment. We can take time to rest. We can take time for leisure. We can take time to cook ourselves a good meal. We can take time to walk our dog in the park, whatever the thing is. Just taking that time, taking that moment. And in that moment, we can breathe and we can see and we can feel and we can reestablish connection with ourselves. And then if we've got that, we can maybe reestablish connection with the world around us.
You mentioned earlier, invite a cultural intuitive to the table. What's a cultural intuitive and what are their roles in this time?
I think you're a cultural intuitive. Someone who works with intuition, someone who's not afraid to speak from a place of intuition. I made that word up as a way of invoking a skill set which is around using intuitive knowledge, really. So someone who is just able to sit in that place and to hold that place fearlessly without being afraid of being shut down by the dominant, louder, rational voices around the table, and knowing that that information is as valid and is just different from the information that they're bringing to the table. So the information that you're gaining from your gut, you know, and that you're gaining from your heart, heart is an organ of perception. It's an organ of perception. It's how we perceive the world. So that information is as valid, if not more valid, than the information that comes from the mind that we're so often presented with as being the high power of, truth and reality. I suppose I was just meaning that we need to work from all of our senses right now, and we need to employ all of our organs to give us knowledge and insight into how we move forwards. And I suppose that's what I was trying to invoke.
It's beautiful. And actually, it is a role that has existed and does exist in so many cultures. There have often been people that are speaking in a more oracular way, that are able to receive information from that land, from the trees, from the community, that know something that you can't rationalize how. And it's still there in so many cultures. It's there in politics, and it's actually there in ways that people don't even realize, with people that people have no idea. But because I have been in an intuitive space for a long time, and I have friends that are intuitives. I have friends that have been hired by the CIA or the Russian government or whoever. And so it's there.
Yeah.
It's there in this world already. And I love actually this title, Cultural Intuitive. It really actually feels like it brings the importance of this time, of what that role is. And yeah, there needs to be one of these people in every meeting.
I guess it's very shamanic, really, but it's a different way of approaching a shamanic. Like you say, it's an oracle, shamanic force, knowledge. I'm just so wary of that phrase because, again, it's one of those phrases that's been, it just gets shut down, just gets poo-pooed and woo-wooed and all of that stuff. So, yeah, I guess it's about finding a way that we can bring, like you say, these people into these spaces. There's a story that I really love from the Buddhist deep ecologist, Joanna Macy, and the Shambhala prophecy that she speaks about. And she speaks about this time of when we've got these metal planes arising, and about these great forces, opposing forces arising in the east and the west. And she speaks about it being a time of great trouble and discomfort in the world and great problems. And within that time, she says, the work we have to do is to go into the corridors of power and to use the two weapons of our hearts and our minds, not just our mind on its own because it's too cool, but that we have to bring in the weapon of our heart, and that weapon being compassion. Weapon's not the right word, that tool, that thing, but that we have to have both, and that we can't go blindly in with the mind or blindly in with the heart, but that we need this marriage of the two, and that's why we have them. And that has always stayed with me. And I think it's about how these cultural intuitives or how these other ways of knowing can now come forth into these spaces and sit at the table. I mean, truly, without shame, without excuse, without apology, with a recognition that this is what we need now. Like,
I really feel that invitation. I feel the power of the way that you're articulating yourself and your body. And I feel that like, yes. And I know that our intuition, it's just part of our intelligence. And like, how insane is it that we're not using part of our intelligence properly? And yet, even with my own journey, there's been so much shame and fear. And with good reason, because there has been so much violence. But this really is the time that we bring these skills back into the center.
I'm with you on the shame and fear. Me too. Yeah, I've found it very hard to talk about in these spaces. And when I spoke about it originally, when I met you, that was one of the first times I'd spoken about it publicly because of the amount of shame that's attached. But then sometimes you come to a point in life when you think, well, we've just got to speak, in a more authentic and truthful way. And I think the time demands that we all do that now. That we have to sort of try, I feel like we need to try our best to move through fear, and working with the plant medicine for me has enabled me to do that more quickly. It's like accelerated that process.
And it feels that our children need to know that they can become intuitive adults, that they don't have to leave it behind. They can become intuitive teenagers and they can keep it going into their whole lives, that it's welcome, it's accepted, and it's necessary. And that only happens if we step forward without fear, without shame, and without allowing that denigration and that piss taking anymore. Even like 4 or 5 years ago, I'd do it myself just to kind of open a doorway. Now it's just like, that's not respectful.
No, something that you've cultivated and that you,
and something that's way bigger than me, that is way bigger than us, and that has such an important place and part in our world and our future.
Yeah, the way bigger than us is the key there, I think. Yeah.
What is the role of dreaming in all of this for you?
Dreaming has been a space in which I've been able to access some of this knowledge, intuitive knowledge. As I mentioned with the story of the bees, intentional dreaming has been a space where I've been able to ask questions and receive, well, I wouldn't say necessarily answers, but some kind of response to those questions. But dreaming is something we all do. Dreaming is something we all have access to. Again, I just feel like it's another powerful tool that I've cultivated. It's something that we all have access to, and that's what I love about it. It's not inaccessible, it's accessible to everyone as a space, as a kind of portal into which we can extend and explore our imaginations and then bring that through into everyday life. And I think it's that thing of what is dream and what is reality. And in some cultures, the dream is the reality as much as the dream. You see what I mean? If that makes any sense. You know, so it's that thing about what is actually reality and what's the dream, and does it actually matter? Like, does it matter if that was a dream, or so really exploring that feels quite fertile ground for me. I'm really also interested and curious about collective dreaming methodologies and how we can harness that in these times, and that as a space for collective liberation practice, the kind of liberatory practice. So like, how about our shared dream space becomes like a commons, so we're sharing dreams, then itself becomes like a garden from which we can draw sustenance. Like, it's something to which we input, but then it's something from which we can also collectively draw sustenance. I'm actually exploring currently in my work, my residency at Arts Admin. It's like, how can we cultivate our dream gardens collectively? And then how can we turn that outwards into the community and cultivate our actual physical gardens? So I'm really excited and interested in exploring dreaming because it is there for all of us.
Beautiful. I'm really curious to experience what comes through with that, and how much actually understanding the collective dreaming that we're all part of, how that actually moves us from that place of individualism into community. When we realize that our experiences are not happening in isolation, that we would be so amazed by how many similarities there are to those around us, of even themes that we're dreaming about, or what we're thinking about, or what we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty in it as well, isn't it? It's like a kind of quick access to really deep shared understanding. And like you say, like seeing similar themes, seeing that reflecting back of your own experience in other people's lives, other people who you may not have met before, who, you know, and suddenly you're like, okay, we're all experiencing this similar thing, or maybe we're not experiencing something similar, but that's really interesting. And yeah, so just that space for connection and reflection and creating relationship.
What is your call to action that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, as I mentioned just now, I'm currently doing a year-long residency in the Arts Admin canteen in London. So that started at the beginning of July with the What Shall We Build Here festival. And in that I explored how we can create intimacy with the natural world without proximity. So the themes of the residency are biodiversity, cultivating radical kinship, and care in an urban biome. Basically, there's lots of activity coming up this autumn, including some of the collective dreaming parties, happenings, a kind of living, dying installation in the space in the canteen. And I'm working on this in collaboration with a sound artist called Keir Vine. So there'll be a proper announcement in August, and the programme will be announced on the Arts Admin website, and that's www.artsadmin.co.uk. And so, yeah, please take a look. And if you're in London, come and join us. And if you're not in London, have a look on the website, because there'll be resources and sound material for you to take journeys and travel yourself with us.
What is your call to action for something that everyone that's listening can do that takes this conversation into embodiment in their own lives?
My call to action is to do something really simple, which is, if you have the time, to keep a journal, a dream journal, and just notice what comes up, maybe for a week or a couple of weeks, and start there.
Can you share with us how our friends listening can connect with you more deeply, to your website and anything else that you've got coming up?
My website's www.zoelaureenpalmer.com. I'm doing R&D mostly over the summer, so all my things will start again in September, and I will be at the Arts Admin Canteen, so that's the best place to catch up with what's going on.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zoe. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today and to explore and share and dream together.
Likewise, thank you, Amisha. It's been wonderful.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.